The chains rattled before the sirens did. It was just after midnight when the transport van screeched to a halt outside the eastern gate of Graymore Penitentiary, an aging maximum security prison buried deep in the American heartland. The guards were supposed to be prepared. They always were. But something about that night, about the way the air felt heavy and still, made even the most seasoned officers hesitate. Inside the van were 10 men the courts had labeled too dangerous for mercy. Men whose names had once dominated headlines, whose crimes had hollowed out families and terrified entire cities. They were being transferred under emergency orders after a shocking discovery at another facility, a guard found dead in a secured wing. No witnesses, no alarms, no explanation. And now, Graymore was about to inherit a nightmare. As the gates opened, one of the prisoners leaned forward in his seat, chains clinking softly. He smiled not wide, not proud, but knowing, as if he already understood something the guards did not. 3 hours earlier, the body had been found. Officer Daniel Cruz was discovered slumped in a utility corridor of West Ridge Prison, a place known for strict routines and tighter silence. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no broken bones. His radio lay intact beside him, untouched. Cameras in the corridor had gone dark for exactly 90 seconds, long enough for something to happen, but not long enough to explain how. Investigators were called in immediately. The corridor was sealed. Inmates were locked down. But the unease didn't come from what they saw. It came from what they couldn't explain. Cruz had been a veteran, careful, disciplined, respected. He didn't take risks. He didn't break protocol. And yet, he had died standing inside a prison built to prevent exactly that. By dawn, officials made a decision that would ripple far beyond the walls of West Ridge. The 10 most volatile inmates would be removed at once. No hearings, no delays. Graymore would take them. Graymore was old. Built decades earlier, its stone walls bore the scars of riots, reforms, and forgotten promises. The kind of place where justice felt heavy and time moved slower. Guards joked that the building itself remembered every scream. Warden Elias Crow stood in the intake bay as the van doors opened, watching the prisoners file out one by one. He had read their files. He knew their histories. Yet reading about evil was not the same as standing 3 feet away from it. They didn't shout. They didn't resist. That was the first warning sign. The 10 prisoners moved with quiet precision, eyes scanning the facility, measuring it, as if they weren't being locked away, but introduced. Crow felt it then, a subtle shift, authority slipping, just a fraction. Within days, the routines changed. Not officially, not on paper. But guards began to notice small things. Inmates who had never spoken now exchanged glances. Meal trays were delivered in a certain order. Recreation time adjusted itself without requests. Noise levels dropped not because of discipline, but because of agreement. Silence had rules now. One guard filed a report about an inmate refusing to leave his cell not in protest, but in obedience to something unseen. The report disappeared before it reached the warden's desk. Another officer requested a transfer after overhearing whispers during night rounds. He couldn't repeat what was said, only that it made his hands shake. And the 10 prisoners? They were never seen together. Never needed to be. Detective Mara Ellison arrived at Graymore with one question burning through her thoughts. What happened in those 90 seconds? Ellison was known for her patience. Her ability to sit in a room and wait until the truth grew uncomfortable. She started where others avoided by listening. Interviews with inmates yielded nothing useful. Too careful. Too rehearsed. Guards spoke in half sentences. Fear does that to people. It trims words down to what feels safe. Then she found the incident logs. There were gaps, small ones, a missing signature here, a timestamp adjusted there. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious. But to Ellison, it read like coordination. This isn't chaos. she said quietly to the warden. It's order. Order without oversight was dangerous. The hidden rule revealed itself slowly. In Graymore, punishment no longer came from guards. It came from compliance. Inmates who followed the unspoken code were protected. Those who didn't found themselves isolated, not attacked, not threatened, but erased socially. No one spoke to them. No one shared space. No one intervened when requests went unanswered. Terror doesn't always need violence. Sometimes it just needs certainty. Ellison requested footage from the night Officer Cruz died. It took 3 days to receive 3 days too many. When she finally watched it, her breath caught. The cameras hadn't failed. They had been paused. 90 seconds of perfect stillness. No glitch. No flicker. Someone had known how to reach inside the system. Someone who had planned ahead. The pressure mounted. A second guard collapsed during morning count at Graymore, alive but shaken beyond words. He claimed he felt watched, surrounded, though the corridor had been empty. Medical staff found nothing physically wrong. Psychological stress, they said. Ellison wasn't convinced. She gathered her notes late that night, alone in a small office overlooking the yard. Outside, the prison hummed softly, like a machine learning its own rhythm. The 10 prisoners were housed across different units, different security levels, and yet, everything pointed back to them. Not as individuals, as a structure. The breakthrough came by accident. During a routine maintenance check, a worker unlocked a forgotten storage room B beneath the north wing, a space no one had used in years. Inside were old filing cabinets, dust-covered boxes, and a metal table. On that table lay a notebook. Handwritten, neat, detailed. Ellison flipped through the pages, her pulse rising with each line. Names, dates, outcomes, guards reassigned, inmates isolated, schedules adjusted, consequences delivered without direct action. At the bottom of the final page were 10 marks. Not signatures. Confirmations. As she stared at them, the realization settled like a weight on her chest. The devil wasn't one man behind bars. It was the system they had built inside the cage. And just as Ellison reached for her phone, alarms began echoing through the prison. Slow, deliberate, and unmistakably intentional. Because somewhere above her, the prisoners already knew the notebook had been found. And nothing enrages power more than being exposed. The alarms didn't signal a riot. That was the first thing Detective Mara Ellison realized as she pushed through the stairwell and into the north wing. Riots were loud, chaotic, explosive. This was different. The sirens wailed steadily, methodical, almost controlled like a countdown rather than a warning. Guards flooded the corridors, weapons lowered but ready. Inmates remained locked in their cells, silhouettes unmoving behind bars. No shouting, no banging, no panic. Too calm. Ellison felt it again, that shift she couldn't quite name. The sensation that the prison was no longer reacting to authority, but anticipating it. By the time the alarms cut off, the message had already landed. The lockdown lasted 12 hours. During that time, nothing officially happened. No injuries reported, no property damage, no escape attempts. On paper, it was a success. In reality, the prison fractured. 2 guards called in sick the next morning and never returned. Another resigned without notice, leaving behind his badge and a single sentence written on a scrap of paper. I won't be part of this. Ellison requested emergency clearance to isolate the 10 prisoners. Separate interrogations, restricted communication, total lockdown within lockdown. The request stalled. Legal concerns, administrative delays, budget approvals. Every excuse sounded rehearsed, because someone had already decided the answer would be no. The first disappearance came quietly. An inmate named Russell Pike, low level, serving time for fraud, had agreed to speak with Ellison. He wasn't connected to the 10. He was nervous, jumpy, eager to trade information for protection. He never made it to the interview room. When guards went to escort him from his cell, it was empty. Bed neatly arranged. Personal items untouched. No damage to the door. No camera footage showing movement in or out. It was impossible. And yet, it had happened again. Ellison stood in the doorway, staring at the absence, the same way investigators stared at crime scenes where something vital was missing. Pike hadn't escaped. He had been removed. Erased. That was when the truth began to harden into something terrifying. The 10 weren't just reacting to the investigation. They were managing it. Warden Crow called a closed-door meeting that night. "The prison is bleeding staff," he said, voice low. "Morale is gone. Fear is everywhere." Ellison slid the notebook across the table. "This isn't fear. It's governance." She pointed to the entries. Each outcome tied to an action. Each action timed perfectly to administrative vulnerabilities. Transfers blocked. Complaints buried. Oversight neutralized. "They've built a parallel system," she continued. "One that rewards silence and punishes disruption." "And if we push?" Crow asked. Ellison met his eyes. "Then someone else disappears." The 10 prisoners remained untouched. They didn't threaten. They didn't communicate directly. They didn't need to. Their influence traveled through fear like electricity through wire. Ellison began mapping connections, guard schedules, maintenance access, legal visits, commissary transactions. Patterns emerged slowly, like a picture coming into focus through fog. Money wasn't the driver. Control was. The 10 understood something the system never fully grasped. Prisons run on predictability, and predictability can be hijacked. A federal oversight team arrived 3 days later. They came confident, armed with authority and paperwork. Within hours, that confidence thinned. Their interviews went nowhere. Their requests stalled. Their presence changed nothing. Then one of them made a mistake. A junior agent announced openly that transfers were being scheduled for the 10 prisoners. The news spread fast, than Ellison thought possible. That night, the agent's car was found abandoned on the highway outside town. Engine running, door open. He was discovered hours later, unharmed but shaken, wandering barefoot through a field miles away. He couldn't explain how he got there, couldn't remember leaving his car. Doctors blamed exhaustion. Ellison knew better. It was a demonstration. The next move came from inside the prison. One of the 10 requested a meeting. He wasn't violent, never had been. Convicted of orchestrating financial crimes that destroyed companies and lives, he had received multiple life sentences without ever pulling a trigger. He sat across from Ellison in the interview room, hands folded, posture relaxed. "You shouldn't be here," he said calmly. "I could say the same," Ellison replied. He smiled faintly. "You're chasing symptoms, not the disease. You killed a guard," she said. His expression didn't change. "No, the system did." Ellison leaned forward. "People are disappearing." "People disappear all the time," he replied, "especially when no one knows their name." She slid a photo across the table, Russell Pike's empty cell. For the first time, the man paused. "You've upset the balance," he said quietly. "And you're afraid?" Ellison asked. He shook his head. "I'm disappointed." That night, the notebook vanished, locked in an evidence cabinet. Logged, sealed, gone. No signs of forced entry. No alarms triggered. The cabinet stood open, empty, mocking them. Ellison stared at it, anger flaring beneath the dread. That notebook had been leverage. Proof. Now it was a message. You are not in control. The fallout was immediate. Witnesses withdrew cooperation. Paper trails collapsed. The federal team reduced its presence, citing jurisdictional conflicts. The investigation slowed not because the threat was gone, but because confronting it felt futile. Ellison refused to stop. She worked alone now, piecing together fragments, chasing shadows. Every step forward was me. The decision came from above Graymore, far above the warden's office, and the concrete yards where men paced in measured circles. There would be no public reckoning, no indictments, no midnight arrests, no dramatic removal of the 10 prisoners who had bent the prison around themselves like iron softened by heat. Instead, there would be containment. That was the word used in the final directive sent to Detective Mara Ellison, a carefully worded order that sounded responsible, strategic, and fatally dishonest. Preserve stability. Prevent escalation. Avoid further loss. Ellison read it twice, then folded the paper with deliberate care. She had chased killers before. She had watched criminals lie, beg, threaten, and break. But she had never seen the law choose silence so cleanly. Graymore would not be cleaned out. It would be managed. The extraction plan was flawless on paper. The 10 prisoners would be moved simultaneously to different federal facilities across the country. Black site prisons buried in deserts, forests, and forgotten counties. No advance notice, no overlap, no chance to coordinate. It was old-world justice wearing modern clothes. But even as Ellison reviewed the logistics, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest. The same instinct that had warned her before. Power doesn't fight openly when it knows it might lose. It adapts. The transfers began before dawn. Chains clinked softly in the corridors as doors opened one by one. The first prisoner complied without resistance. The second offered a polite nod. The third asked for a moment to put on his glasses. By the fourth, radios crackled with static. By the fifth, a transport vehicle failed to start. By the sixth, a fire alarm activated in a completely unrelated wing, forcing half the response team to redeploy. It was chaos without panic, disruption without noise. The seventh transfer was delayed by a sudden court injunction filed overnight, signed by a judge who would later admit he didn't remember authorizing it. The eighth prisoner collapsed during intake, his blood pressure dangerously low. He was rushed to the infirmary, transfer postponed. The ninth cell was opened, empty, no damage, no disturbance, no explanation. The bed was perfectly made. Ellison felt the room tilt slightly, as if gravity itself had shifted. They hadn't stopped the plan. They had edited it. The 10th prisoner waited. He sat on his bunk, hands folded, facing the door before it opened, calm, prepared, unsurprised. When Ellison stepped into the doorway, he looked up and smiled faintly. "You should have left," he said. Ellison didn't respond. Chains were secured. The transfer proceeded. For a brief, fragile moment, it felt like victory. By sunrise, 6 prisoners had been successfully relocated. 2 were hospitalized. 1 was missing. 1 remained. Graymore exhaled. The consequences arrived quietly. The federal oversight team withdrew within days, citing jurisdictional complexity. Warden Crow announced early retirement. 3 guards resigned. 2 others transferred to administrative roles far from cell blocks. No charges were filed. The official report concluded that institutional stress had contributed to irregularities and that reforms would be implemented over time. Ellison was reassigned. Her case files were sealed. Graymore returned to routine. But routine had changed. Inmates moved differently, now less noise, more awareness. Guards enforced rules cautiously, as if walking on ice they couldn't see. The prison felt calmer. That frightened Ellison more than the alarms ever had. Because calm meant agreement. 3 months later, Ellison received a call from a colleague in another state. A new federal prison. Newly transferred inmate. Nonviolent. History. Polite. Organized. Within weeks, minor incidents began stacking up. Cameras malfunctioned at precise moments. Paperwork stalled. Inmates deferred to one man they never spoke to directly. The man with the glasses. Ellison didn't need confirmation. She already knew. She boxed up the last of her belongings late one evening, the office empty except for the hum of fluorescent lights. As she slid a drawer closed, something caught her eye. An envelope taped underneath her desk. Inside was a single page, typed, a list of 10 names, 9 crossed out, 1 left untouched. Below it, a line she had seen before, rewritten with clinical precision. Mercy creates vacancies. Control fills them. Ellison sat back slowly, the weight of it settling into her bones. The 10 prisoners had never been the point. They were a prototype. The missing 9th inmate was never found. No escape footage, no remains, no official acknowledgement. His cell was reassigned months later, but inmates refused to sleep there. They said the light flickered without cause, that footsteps echoed during count when no one was walking. Superstition, administrators claimed. Ellison knew better. Systems remember. The public never learned the full story. They were told the danger had been neutralized, that order had been restored, that the worst men were locked away, powerless. But power doesn't disappear when you cage it. It studies the bars. It waits. And somewhere in America, behind reinforced doors and silent corridors, the law continued its quiet compromise, choosing stability over justice, silence over truth. They believed the devil was behind bars. They never considered what happens when mercy teaches evil how to organize. And if this story unsettled you, you're not ready for the next one. Subscribe if you dare.